women who, for whatever reason, didn't want to have a relationship initially, but then maybe came back a year or two later. And then I've gotten them onto it and have listened to them. And it's one of the joys of my life is I've listened to them as they start to scroll through the pictures and hear them go, oh, 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 and feel the emotion that they feel when they realize that this child is doing well. That to me is an ethical adoption because good has now come from that experience.
Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. This one's going to be juicy. We're stepping right into one of the most controversial conversations in adoption. Adoptions in Utah. They've been called the Wild West of adoption, accused of exploiting birth mothers, and labeled as one of the fastest and easiest adoption processes in the country. But at what cost? Are these criticisms fair, or is there more to the story? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Donna Pope, single mom through adoption of 3 now grown men, executive director of Heart to Heart Adoptions, an agency licensed in Utah, Florida, and New York with a nationwide reach. Donna has been in the adoption world for over 26 years, is a strong advocate for ethical adoption practices and long-term relationships between biological and adoptive families, and is the creator of Our Hearts Connect, an innovative platform designed to support communication between members of the adoption triad. With so much controversy surrounding Utah's adoption laws, Donna is here to set the record straight, or at least give us an insider's perspective on what's really happening. Are birth mothers being coerced? Are agencies prioritizing profit over ethics? And why does Utah seem to be at the center of the adoption debate? This is Donna's first ever podcast appearance, and she's agreed to be on the hot seat. So let's show her some grace and get right into it. Donna, thanks for being brave. I appreciate you. So I think that what I've heard as far as all the scrutiny in Utah and a little in a lot of these articles comes back to marketing, which is a big part of any business. By the way, if anyone didn't know that. And when it comes to marketing for expectant moms, it gets a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, for sure.
There have been reports of aggressive, quote unquote, aggressive marketing tactics by Utah adoption agencies targeting pregnant women from other states. What are your thoughts on working across state lines when you don't necessarily have a physical presence in those states? Let's talk about that because it is questioned a lot.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think a better person to ask would be the birth moms. And I've asked them a lot, why did you call us? Most marketing anymore, when I first started, all marketing was done in yellow pages. Now, and you know, if you wanted to put your ad in somebody's yellow page, you paid them the money and there was a physical thing. That's not the way any marketing is done anymore. Now it's all on the internet. And so you put your website out there, you maybe put ads in Google AdWords, but how do those ads reach people? Well, they reach them because they ask questions like open adoption or need help placing baby for adoption, or give up my baby. They'll type in something that then brings up these ads. And then they can look at them and review them and then decide whether or not to respond to them or call. And so I've asked people, why did you call us? Why didn't you call the agency down the road? And invariably, they will say, because they couldn't provide me what I needed. Well, what did you need that they couldn't provide you? And so then you can kind of explore that. Well, what do birth moms need? Well, they need, first of all, someone to listen to them. They need someone that will hear them and that will help them address the issues that they're struggling with. And so they need good counseling. They need someone that will listen to them, that will hear them, that will see them. Now, does every state have people like that? Well, yeah, I think so, for sure, for sure. And the second thing that they need is they sometimes need financial support. If we're asking a birth mother to grow a baby, I guess you could say, but bring life to this child, we're asking her to give up other things, which may be a job, it may be other opportunities, in order for her to bring life to this child. That's a big deal. It's a tough thing to do. So they are almost always in difficult financial situations. Mm-hmm. So having someone who can help them with the finances, the housing, the getting to the doctor, the food. Most birth mothers have other children, helping them with their other children. That takes some financial help. It's not buying her child, it's simply supporting her as she gives life to this child. That's something that she needs. The most important thing, in my opinion, birth mothers need is a good family. Somebody that she can connect with, that she can feel comfortable, that she wants to place her baby for adoption with. Mm-hmm. That sometimes is one of the more challenging things for different states to have. They may not have an abundance of families that she may feel comfortable with. And so a lot of times, one of the things that birth mothers look for is they'll look for families that agencies may have. And they might find a family that they relate to more than another one. And so those three things, someone that can support them and help them, someone that can help them get through this period of time while they have the baby, and then someone that can help them find the family that they feel comfortable placing the child with. Now, I would go further, and that is someone that will continue to support them even after the placement happens, that can help this long-term healthy relationship between them and the adoptive family. Those are services. And are they found everywhere? No, they're not. They're not. But are they found in a lot of places? Oh, for sure. There's a lot of amazing agencies out there that can provide those 4 levels of services. Should we tell a birth mother that lives in Arkansas, you can't have those services? You can't have them because you're in Arkansas. No, we don't do that. And I'm not picking on Arkansas. There's great services in Arkansas. But if she finds someone, do we tell her? No. You have to be limited in the services that you can have because of your location. Well, that's part of the reality of life for sure. But we all know that we look for, when we have a service that we need, we search for it. We all do that, regardless of what the area is that we're searching for. We ought to provide that same opportunity for women that are doing the most important thing of their life, finding a home for their child.
And do you do that by bringing them to you, or do you go to them?
Yeah, that's changed over the years for us. If a birth mother is homeless and she's living in a tent down by the river, or she's in an abusive situation and she doesn't have other options, certainly we want to provide her that option. And sometimes that can be for her to come to apartments that we have. I will tell you that right now, about 80% of all the women we work with want to stay where they're at. They're comfortable with their doctor. They're financially at least okay enough that they have housing and they have their children. They don't want to pull their children out of school. And so by far, about 80% stay where they're at. And we work with them generally in association with their local resources as well. Um, but some, they got to get away. They got to get away. And so we'll help them in those cases.
Do you think that's the case for most agencies in Utah? Because I think you might be rare in saying that a lot of times you'll go there and that's changed. I think there's a lot of other agencies that almost every single adoption is in Utah. Are there conversations about that? Do you know that other agencies have been having?
Yeah. And I think probably maybe a little bit more. I think it goes back to that whole idea of giving the mom the space, whether that be physical space or emotional space, to make the best decision that she can. And that takes time, and it takes kind of a finessing to give her. Sometimes she needs a different physical space. But sometimes she just needs the emotional space. And how all of the agencies do it, I don't know all the numbers for them.
Fair enough. I just didn't know if it was like a conversation being had among, you said you talk a lot to the other agencies. And I do want to state, we are talking to one person from one agency in Utah, just like every adoptee has their own story and every person, right. So this is one story in Utah.
I certainly know the intention of giving that space for birth mothers is there. That I do know. As I've talked with all agencies, that desire to do the best for that birth mother is always there.
Mm-hmm. Now, what happens after they give birth and you have them housed in a different state than they're from, or not, or they live in Utah and you're still housing them? What happens after birth typically?
Totally depends on their situation. Hopefully the discussion about that happens even before any discussion about that. There's the there's the pregnancy plan. What are you going to do? How are you going to get through the rest of this pregnancy? There's the hospital plan. What's going to happen in the hospital? Who do you want there? How long do you want to stay? What's going to happen? And then there's the after delivery plan. And all three of those plans really should be discussed to some degree, at least, prior to them as working with them, for sure. And so if they decide that they want to come to Utah, then certainly the hospital plan is a big part. And if they want to stay in the hospital or whatever their medical needs are, then they're honored. And then they need to have some time. Some women, the minute they get out of the hospital, they want to be on a plane and out of here. Mm-hmm. Others, they want to move here. They don't ever want to leave at all. And then it's a matter of helping them find an apartment and helping them get established and getting a job and stuff like that here. Most need a week or so of healing and kind of recovery, and then they want to go back home. It totally depends on the situation and on the birth mom, but for sure, having that conversation with them even before making any of these decisions is an important thing. Will it change? Oh, for sure. And so what is our responsibility if it changes? What's our responsibility if they decide to parent? Well, it's the same as everything else. Give them the space to make sure that they have a good decision, and then help them make a good plan, a parenting plan, and then help them start to implement it. Is that offset the desires of the adoptive family? Well, to a degree, but that's where adoptive families get seasoned and go through frustrations and disappointment. Does it have a financial cost? For sure. But that again is where the challenges of balancing the financial needs of the agency come in.
Yeah. Well, you just covered all my questions in there. So thank you.
There you go.
What type of oversight and regulations are Utah adoption agencies under?
The Office of Licensing, and I've worked with licensing in 5 states now. Well, actually more 6, and they're pretty much all kind of the same. They require, you to show your records, and there's extensive records that you keep on each situation. And at any point, if there's a complaint about any aspect of it, then they're responsible to come in and review your records. So each year, not all states are every year, but most states are every year. You have to account for what you've done that year. And if there's any complaints, you have to address those complaints.
And how often is, I assume when they're looking at all your financials and
For sure.
all of that, how often do they do that?
Every year. Not in all states. In Utah, they do it every year.
Mm-hmm.
Though I did hear you could ask for them to do it every other year, but we've always done it every year. And they come in, and the things they look at is, like you said, their finances. They look at not every record of every case that you've had, because that would take them forever. But
Mm-hmm.
they'll go through a number of records, and they'll review and make sure that you're following the pattern that's been set up.
Okay.
There are 2 sets of laws, and this is pretty much the case with all states. There's the general laws that govern an organization, particularly a not-for-profit organization, and that's a question you're going to ask me in a minute here, but about how does it fit with not-profit. But there's how, so in general organizations, and then there's a set of rules for child placing agencies specifically, and those rules are quite extensive. And in the time I've been doing this, I've watched us go through 3 iterations of those rules as society trying to, be good oversight has changed those rules. And our responsibility is to follow the rules. But I think even more so, our responsibility is to help make the rules good. And you can help make the rules good both through legislative means as well as writing the rules in such a way that we do, as you said, ethical adoptions, that we cause no harm as much as possible and do good adoptions where we align the interests of all the parties as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the societal oversight, which is pretty much the same as all states.
Yeah. And thinking, going back for a second about bringing moms into Utah.
Mm-hmm.
So that financial piece, right? You're balancing offering support to birth moms, and also could it be looked at as a financial incentive, and could that be seen as coercive? You're giving them a flight and housing and groceries and all of this stuff. Could that be seen as a financial coercion? Before we go on, I'm going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We have so much more to cover. Shopping for the right hair and skincare products can be tough, especially for multicultural or transracial families. That's exactly why Kate Shanahan created Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. When Kate and her husband adopted their daughter, she realized that caring for her melanin-rich skin and beautiful curls was essential to raising a confident girl. And as a cancer survivor herself, chemical-free ingredients were a must. She wanted one place with safe, natural products for her whole family, plus education and resources for families like hers. Now you can find it all at Sweet Peachtree Marketplace. Just visit sweetpeachtree.com, and because you're a listener of the Adoption Roadmap podcast, if you use code ROADMAP10, you'll get 10% off your first order. sweetpeachtree.com with the code ROADMAP10 for 10% off your first order. Sweet Peachtree, celebrating every curl, every shade, every family. So that financial piece, right? You're balancing offering support to birth moms, and also could it be looked at as a financial incentive, and could that be seen as coercive? You're giving them a flight and housing and groceries and all of this stuff. Could that be seen as a financial coercion?
It could. In all honesty, there's really, with the exception of the flights itself, there's really no difference in the amount of support that's provided if they're staying where they're at or as if they're in Utah. In fact, in many ways, it's far more expensive for them to come to Utah, expensive for the agency for them to come to Utah because of the flights and the housing and things like that. But so from a financial point of view, it's not a good financial thing. From their point of view, do they feel trapped or do they feel, I don't, for us at least, there's really no difference in the level of support. If they have their own apartment in Iowa or someplace else, versus if they come and stay in an apartment in Utah, they still have an apartment. They still have, and if they need help paying for the rent in that apartment, we can help them pay for the rent in that apartment. If they need, in fact, in many ways, it's better for them to stay there because generally they might know how to get food a little cheaper, and maybe they have food stamps there, or maybe they have other Section 8 housing, things like that, that would actually be cheaper for them to stay there. So there's really not a lot of difference whether they come to Utah or stay there in the financial support they receive.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me about Hearts Connect.
Well, years ago, there's 3 parties in the adoption triad. And again, we're trying to align the interests. And I said 3 as far as the biological parents, the adoptive parents, and the adoptee. But when I say the biological parents, I also want to include grandmas. For those
You know
who
what?
are grandmas.
Good point.
It's both the biological mother, the biological father, and the biological grandparents. All of these people care about this child. So they have a strong interest. Well, initially, adoptive families have what I call the grab and run syndrome. It's a natural emotion. And that's when a mom wants to take her child and go create a nest or a safe place for that child. And it is a maternal, I call it sometimes the mother bear feeling, where you want to take your child and go and be the mom of this child. And so sometimes they kind of want to avoid having a relationship with the biological family initially. So the biological family's interest in a relationship is pretty high, whereas the adoptive family's interest may be a little lower. That changes over time. Over time, the biological family, they get on with their lives and they're moving on, and their interest level starts to diminish. They're just moving on with life. Whereas the adoptive family, now they're starting to raise this child and questions begin to come up. And their interest in getting answers to those questions, their interest in that relationship may rise. And then years later, maybe 12 years, 16 years, maybe 20 years, the adoptee's interest in that relationship starts to come up. So we've got these 3 very different parties. And so we wanted to create a space in which they could all 3 be involved and feel safe, feel like boundaries weren't going to be overstepped, or they weren't going to be in any way hurt by the relationship. And so we created a safe platform which can be monitored. Now, it doesn't always have to be monitored. And sometimes people hear the word monitored and, they're going to tell us what to say. No, the value of it is that if things start to go off, if one of the parties starts to act in such a way that would damage the relationship, then a counselor can step in and give advice or help them word things in a way that wouldn't damage the relationship. The idea is to have a long-term, healthy relationship between these parties, particularly for the interest of the adoptee, because someday that adoptee may have questions that only the biological family could answer, or may want a relationship that may be of value. And so having a safe place for this long-term healthy relationship is what we want to do. Now, I brought up the birth father and the biological parents because they want it too. Now, sometimes they don't care, but if they do care, it's a service for them as well.
Do you find that at a certain point they take it off the platform?
They're absolutely welcome to do that. What we ask for is we ask them to give it 6 months or at least through finalization, because then sometimes the adoptive parent can kind of relax a little bit and they're more open to having a relationship. But we also encourage them that even if they do take it off the platform, that occasionally they post. And the reason for that is because then if a phone gets lost or something happens, you've got this ongoing relationship that the adoptee can look at some point. And our requirement for adoptive families is that they are willing to post. We have no requirements for the biological family. They can come in or they cannot. But the adoptive families have the responsibility to post. And so many times I've gotten on with women who, for whatever reason, didn't want to have a relationship initially, but then maybe came back a year or two later. And then I've gotten them onto it and have listened to them. And it's one of the joys of my life is I've listened to them as they start to scroll through the pictures and hear them go, oh, oh, and feel the emotion that they feel when they realize that this child is doing well. That to me is an ethical adoption, because good has now come from that experience.
That's so beautiful. At first I was thinking, well, I mean, what a pain in the butt to have this. And I can't, at a certain point, don't you just have a relationship and you can go your own way? But you're absolutely right. I mean, there have been years at a time where my son's birth mom disappeared, and then she has come back, but I don't always know if she will, or she came back the first time just by a fluke. She found me on Facebook, which I didn't even know she knew my last name. So that there's that piece, people coming and going and losing phones, like you said. I love the piece. I didn't even think about this, that the adoptee can go back when they're older and kind of flip through the conversations. So you might want to have an offline relationship, but also have this like scrapbook of communication. And the other thing is, at the beginning, it's awkward, and you might have some problems with setting boundaries, or if somebody asks a question and you're not sure how to deal with it. You were talking about monitoring and not monitoring. Is there a way for a family to say, hey, can you go in and listen to this? I need some advice.
Oh, they do all the time. They do all the time. And it gives a sense of stability to the biological family, no matter who it is. And even if they wish it was more, if they know that every month or every quarter, this family's going to post, and then they can kind of let it be. And then later on come back, and it creates a stability for them that maybe they don't otherwise have in their life. And that's super important. Now, sometimes they don't need to be monitored. They're just fine. But if they ever want to, then that stability becomes an important part for them.
Can they ask you to stop monitoring?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. And we'll talk with them about it, and we'll say, okay, no, you don't. And sometimes both parties will say, we don't want to be monitored because we don't want someone over our shoulder. Okay, that's fine. But then they might want to come back and say, can you help us here with this?
I could see it. And is it just, can they do calls over it too? Like video chats?
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And we do Zoom calls all the time. And sometimes they'll say, hey, I want to do a Zoom call, and they'll kind of coordinate. And then they may or may not want us to be involved. We certainly, you can tell there's some situations where, nah, I don't think you should do this on your own. Whereas other times, you guys will be fine. You'll be fine.
Okay, I'm thoroughly impressed that, what do you have? Your master's in social work, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your master's in social work who works in adoption went ahead and created a software company.
Yeah.
Since when are we all so techie,
Well, it's been a challenge. And my master's not in social work, it's in counseling.
Counseling, so, right. Yeah. I knew you were, yeah.
They are different.
Right.
No, I didn't intend for it to be a tech company. I just intended for us to have a place where it was safe. And people can go on and they can create a Facebook account, and oftentimes we'll do that. And many times those work out just fine. But there's other times when they maybe don't work out as good. So this is just the standard that we have set and encourage people, and then variations off of it certainly are welcome.
So can anybody use it, or any individual who has adopted can choose to use it?
Not just adopted. I really want to get this into the foster care.
Oh, yeah.
I really, because when I think about a child being taken from his or her home and put in a foster home, and that child being 3, 4, whatever, trauma. And so if you could set it up so that then the biological mom could get on and put in the group, and then the case manager could be in the group too.
I was going to say there needs to be some regulations, probably.
Yeah. And you could have a case manager in there that could help monitor it and modulate the communication. What a blessing that would be for both of those parties. And then over the long term, foster care, foster families, even having relationships with adoptive families and with biological families, you could have a group where all parts of it, again, watching out for the best interest of that child.
Yeah, so interesting. And I know agencies can implement this too, for sure, right, and have it for their family. So how would somebody find out more about this?
Yeah, they can text me. They could text you and you could forward it on to me, or they can email me.
Please just email Donna.
Yeah. Email me and we'll walk you through a demonstration. Sometimes when you start a new platform like this, it feels a little overwhelming. And I've become more and more aware of that because I'm trying to do podcast. And sometimes you think it's simple, but it's not as simple as you think it is.
No.
We would probably want to help you get on it. There's no cost to get set up. We want people to start to use it. Our goal is not to make a ton of money on it. Over time, there would probably need to be a cost for your families or your clients that you could build into your fees to help with monitoring and to help with the platform itself.
Wow. So we'll have that link in the show notes. So it's just to you directly?
Yeah, they can do that. Or they can just simply go on to ourheartsconnect.com.
Okay,
so
perfect.
ourheartsconnect.com, and there'll be a thing that says sign up or request a demo, and then we'll get an email and we can help with that.
Awesome. What do you wish people understood about adoptions in Utah that maybe they don't? Maybe they have a total, they're believing, everything they read or everything on social media. What message do you want to send to those people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've said it several times. Utah's really not that different from anywhere else. I think years ago, we wanted Utah to be kind of a safe harbor. And this is where maybe some of the misunderstandings. We wanted it to be a safe harbor, a place where adoptions could happen and that they would be safe. But I don't know that that's any different from any other state. That we do lots of Florida adoptions, and we want that to be a safe place for adoptive families to come, for birth mothers to come. And again, I go back to this idea of a space. The agency itself should be a place for adoptive families to come and feel honored and cared about and respected, and their finances, their resources protected as much as possible. The birth mother needs to be able to come to a safe place where her story can be heard, where she can be seen, where she can be cared about and respected. Because ultimately, we have this battle in our nation right now between pro-choice, which is the birth mother should have the right to choose, and pro-life, the child should have the right to life. And absolutely, both of those things are good. They're good. Adoption is an amazing blend of pro-choice and pro-life.
Ooh, now she's getting political,
I
folks.
am getting political, and I can't help it because it is a blend of the two of them, but there's a cost.
Mhm.
And that cost is primarily on the birth mom. She's the one that's carrying the child. She's the one that has to go through the delivery. So she has the cost. So there's a cost there in many, many ways. She needs to be able to come to a place where people respect and honor that, what she's giving. But also there's other parts to the part as well. There's the adoptive family, and all of them need to come together. Does Utah do that well? I would like to think that we do. And to whatever degree that we don't, I want us to get better. But I think that all states should have that same philosophy as well.
Yeah, that's great. And again, I want to reiterate, just like everybody has their own story, there's going to be stories that come out in the media from any side, right? From the birth mom, from the adoptee, from the adoptive parent. And hopefully, if there's anything you've learned through this conversation, that adoption is so complex and there's so many different sides, for lack of a better word. There's so many moving parts that usually when we're reading about these stories, these articles, these experiences, that's one person's experience at a given moment, and you're missing at least two other sides of it, right? Two other pieces of that. What they are saying might be true. It might be their reality. And there is another big part of it that you are not seeing.
Right. And even if you were to come back to that very same story,
Mm-hmm.
a week later, a few months later, a year later, it might be totally different.
It might be totally different. And I'm not saying that mistakes aren't made or that people don't make bad decisions. I know you've done that. I've done that. We're human. Everybody has. I just wish that people understood the complexities of adoption to the point where when they read, they take that information in as part of a truth, and then they go digging to either find out the other sides or, instead of spewing hate or trying to throw people under the bus or, it's complex. It's way more complicated than what anyone's reading on a social media post or in an article.
For sure.
And so I know, speaking for myself, I will always tell people, I will read, I will take it in, and I will explore. I will never jump on a bandwagon because that can be really harmful.
And that when we talk about exploiting, I think that's where the exploitation happens most.
Oof.
Because if you take a woman who's in a crisis and you get her feeling like she has been wronged, in some ways you're exploiting a natural emotional process that she's going through. Ooh, that's not a nice thing to do. It's not.
Yeah.
And we need to be really careful to not do that.
How do you have a strong backbone when you start reading things that are written about you, about your state, about the industry that you work in. I struggle with this too. How do you deal with that?
That's a good question. I remember years ago I didn't do it very well. It would hurt me. I would be hurt. Um, and then for a while I had to quit reading anything. I had to go, well, I'm not going to even read it. Um, Over time, it's kind of like your perspective rises. You go up higher and you see the broader picture more and more. And that broader picture encompasses both in people, a broader picture of people, but also a broader picture of time. So space and time and people, meaning you know that you catch anybody at any particular point in time, you're going to hear one story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas over time, their story will change. And that's just a natural part. We talked about the emotional stages of grief. It just is a natural part. You also see people. They grow and they learn and they become stronger. Organizations grow and learn and become stronger. And anytime you stick them, you are like this because at this point in time, you are like this. That's who you are. Boy, we don't want that to be said about any of us. We don't want birth mothers to hear the message, you are like this because of whatever's happening at this point in time in her life. That may be difficult. You don't want that. And none of us like that. So when we have a brighter perspective over time and over the growth process that any of us can make, as well as over the multifaceted parts of this industry, there is no industry I can even imagine that is more fraught with potential judgments. Yeah. For a woman to place her child for adoption, lots of judgment comes in that. And if there's any industry and any people looking at an industry that should feel compassion and kindness towards the process, it should be this industry. Now, for people to come in, I don't want anyone to be exploited. And I don't want agencies to exploit it, and I don't want news organizations to exploit anybody and become judgmental of the challenges. Because again, we're talking about multi-interests, the interest of the child, the interest of the adoptive families, the interest of the birth mother, the interest of the birth father, the interest of the agency in general, the interest of the state. There are many people with many different types of interests, and sometimes they're in conflict and sometimes they're aligned. And where possible, we do adoption service a disservice if we disalign those interests or we start picking them apart. But when we try to bring them in harmony, good things are able to happen.
Amen. A to the men, Donna Pope. Thank you so much. You've given us so many golden nuggets. Before I let you go, I'm doing a quick fire round.
Okay.
First is a shout out. I want you to shout out either a person or an organization that has influenced your adoption journey personally or the work that you're doing in adoption.
Yeah. Well, I would shout out to some of the agencies that are getting picked on right now. I have learned so much from other agencies that are in Utah, and I could Act of Love, which has been blasted sometimes, has taught me so much about how to be kind. So I would shout out. And Rebecca, you are one of them, to the consultants that work with our families. We were talking about this morning, that I wished we had more time to work with adoptive families. And certainly we want to listen to them and talk with them and hear their stories. There is a limitation to our time because we do want to give space for the birth mother. So when they when there's another party like consultants that do give that extra time and attention to adoptive families, we're very, very grateful for that. I give a shout out to agencies all throughout the United States. I talked with an agency in New Hampshire this morning. Man, I love them. They are called Adoption Resources, and they're just a little agency that just tries to do good. They do some international and they do some domestic adoption. I love the people that we get to work with throughout the United States. So a shout out to them as well.
I love it. What's one piece of advice you would like to share with adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents?
Yeah, it's a simple one. Hang in there. It really is. I hate to say it this way, but try to see every struggle you go through as making you better and stronger. These things will be for your experience, and they will be for your good. And as you go through them, it helps you attune to the experiences that the birth mom is going through. And quite honestly, attune to the experiences that your child will go through. The more the more you struggle, the stronger you will get, and the more you'll be able to support and help others that are struggling too.
What's one thing you wish every adoptive parent knew before they brought their child home?
That is going to be hard. Sometimes I want to say, okay, this is going to be hard, but it's the hard that makes it worth it. It's the hard, and what's hard is trying to see things from the other person's perspective. And sometimes with your kids, it's hard to see it from their perspective. But when you struggle with that and do, it enlarges your soul. I had an adoptive family ask me one time, what should we do? They were struggling with the issue of transracial adoption. They were a Caucasian family considering adopting an African American. And they said, should we do it? And I said, depends. Are you happy with your life now? And they said, well, I said, because I can promise you this, your life will change. And if you don't want your life to change, then don't do this, because your life will change. And it will change in the following ways. There will be some negative parts about it, but even the negative parts will be positive if you see them that way. Your mind, your heart, your soul will expand, because you now will love someone who looks different than you. Now, that is the case for every adoptive parent, whether it's interracial or not. You now will love with all your heart someone different than you. And that learning to love someone so different than you changes you and makes you a far better person. But it's hard.
Describe adoption in 3 words.
3 words. It's all about love. And that is the word, because if it's not about love, if it's about selfishness in any way, then it tints it. So I'm just going to go with love. I'm just going to stick with love.
Okay. Adoption is not just a destination. It's a journey filled with love, resilience, and growth. Wherever you are on this roadmap, trust in your path, stay open to learning, and always lead with your heart. You already have everything you need to create a beautiful story for your family. And when the road takes unexpected detours, I'm here to help you navigate every turn along the adoption roadmap. Thank you so much, Donna.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support at rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.